Hello everyone. Today, we are going to discuss several provisions of the Republic Act No. 8550, as amended by Republic Act No. 10654. Specifically, we are going to tackle Section 106 to Section 137. Section 106 of Republic Act No. 10654 is about violation of harvest control rules. The law states that, it shall be unlawful for any person, to fish in violation of harvest control rules, as determined by the Department. Upon a summary finding of administrative liability, the offender shall be punished with confiscation of catch and fishing gear, revocation of license, and an administrative fine of any of the following. For municipal fishing, it is 3 times the value of the catch, or 20,000 pesos, whichever is higher. If the offender fails to pay the fine, he or she can render community service instead. For small-scale commercial fishing, it is 5 times the value of the catch, or 100,000 pesos, whichever is higher. For medium-scale commercial fishing, it is 5 times the value of the catch, or 1 million pesos, whichever is higher. And for large-scale commercial fishing, it is 5 times the value of the catch, or 5 million pesos, whichever is higher. Upon conviction by a court of law, the offender shall be punished with 6 months and 1 day to 6 years imprisonment, and a fine twice the administrative fine, confiscation of catch and fishing gear, and revocation of license. Section 107, is about aquatic pollution. Aquatic pollution shall be unlawful. Aquatic pollution is defined as the introduction by human or machine, directly or indirectly, of substances or energy to the aquatic environment, which result or is likely to result in such deleterious effects, as to harm living and non-living aquatic resources, pose potential and or real hazard to human health, hindrance to aquatic activities, such as fishing and navigation, including dumping/disposal of waste and other marine litters, discharge of petroleum or residual products of petroleum, or carbonaceous materials/substances and other radioactive, noxious or harmful liquid, gaseous or solid substances, from any water, land or air transport or other human-made structure. Deforestation, unsound agricultural practices, such as the use of banned chemicals and excessive use of chemicals, intensive use of artificial fish feed, and wetland conversion, which cause similar hazards and deleterious effects, shall also constitute aquatic pollution. Upon a summary finding of administrative liability, the offender shall be fined with 300,000 to 500,000.00 pesos, and an additional fine of 15,000 pesos per day, until the violation ceases and the fines are paid, the imposition of cease and desist order, closure or suspension of the development, construction or facility, or cessation of operations, or disconnection of water supply. Upon conviction by a court of law, the offender shall be imprisoned for 6 years and 1 day to 12 years, and a fine twice the amount of the administrative fine, and an additional fine of 15,000 pesos per day, until the violation ceases and the fines are paid, the imposition of cease and desist order, closure or suspension of the development, construction or facility, or cessation of operations, or disconnection of water supply. Failure to comply with minimum safety standards is punishable under Section 108. The owner and boat captain of a commercial fishing vessel engaged in fishing who, upon demand by proper authorities, fails to exhibit or show proof of compliance with the safety standards provided in this code, shall be held liable administratively and criminally. Upon apprehension, the fishing vessel shall be escorted to the nearest port or landing point, and prevent from continuing with the fishing activity. Upon a summary finding of administrative liability, the offender shall be punished with an administrative fine of 100,000 pesos, suspension or cancellation of permit or license, and impoundment of the vessel, until the safety standard has been complied with. Upon conviction by a court of law, the offender shall be imprisoned for 1 month and day to 6 months, and a fine of twice the amount of the administrative fine. The permit or license shall also be suspended or cancelled, together with the impoundment of the vessel, until the safety standard has been complied with. Section 109 is about failure to submit a yearly report on all fish ponds, fish pens, and fish cages. It shall be unlawful for owners and operators of fish ponds, fish pens and fish cages, to fail to submit an annual report to the Department, pursuant to Section 57 of this Code. Upon summary finding of administrative liability, the owner of the fish pond, fish pen or fish cage shall be fined with 5,000 pesos per unreported hectare. In case the fish pond is covered by Fish Pond Lease Agreement or FLA, non-submission of a report for 2 consecutive years, shall result to its cancellation. Upon conviction by a court of law, the offender shall be punished with twice the amount of the administrative fine. Section 110 is about gathering and marketing of shellfishes or other aquatic species. The law states that gathering, taking, selling, transferring, possessing, commercially transporting, exporting, forwarding or shipping out any sexually mature shellfishes or other aquatic species identified by the Department, or below the minimum size, or above the maximum quantities prescribed for the species, is unlawful. Other parameters for the protection of heavily traded aquatic species may be promulgated by the Department. Upon a summary finding of administrative liability, an administrative fine equivalent to the value of the species or 50,000 pesos, whichever is higher, is imposed. Similarly, the catch shall be confiscated, and the permit or license of the offender shall be cancelled. Upon conviction by a court of law, the offender shall be imprisoned from 1 month and 1 day to 6 months, and fined equivalent to twice the amount of the administrative fine, and cancellation of the permit or license. Obstruction to navigation or flow or ebb of tide in any stream, river, lake or bay, is prohibited under Section 111. The administrative liability of the offender includes administrative fine of 200,000 pesos, and the dismantling of the obstruction, fish corrals/traps, fish pens or fish cages at the expense of the offender. Upon conviction by a court of law, the offender shall be imprisoned from 1 month and 1 day to 6 months, and a fine of twice the amount of the administrative fine, confiscation of stocks and dismantling of the obstruction, fish corrals/traps, fish pens or fish cages at the expense of the violator. Section 112 tackles non-compliance with good aquaculture practices. It states that fishery operations involving the breeding and farming of fish and other fishery species shall comply with good aquaculture practices, and the guidelines for environmentally sound design and operation for the sustainable development of the aquaculture industry, which shall be promulgated by the Department. The administrative liability of the offender, who commits any violation of the rules and regulations, or provisions thereof, include an administrative fine of 10,000 to 100,000 per day, until the violation ceases and the fines are paid. Upon conviction by a court of law, the offender shall be imprisoned for 3 years, and shall be fined twice the amount of the administrative fine. For purposes of this section, non-compliance with good aquaculture practice and environmentally sound design shall refer to violations of standards, which, after failure of the owner or operator to comply thereto, and to adopt the required remedial measures, despite prior written notice of such violations, result into any of the following situations. 1. 50% mortality of the cultured fish stocks of an aquaculture zone, comprised of several contiguous farms owned by different individuals. 2. Poisoning of wild fish population. 3. Widespread contamination of pests and diseases, or 4. Aquatic pollution as defined under this code. It shall be unlawful to employ unlicensed fisherfolk, fish worker or crew, in a commercial fishing vessel, as indicated in Section 113. The owner or operator of a commercial fishing vessel, employing unlicensed fisherfolk, or fish worker, or crew shall, upon a summary finding of administrative liability, be fined 4,000 pesos for each unlicensed fisherfolk, or fish worker, or crew, and suspension or revocation of license for commercial fishing. It shall likewise be unlawful for Philippine-flagged fishing vessels engaged in distant water fishing, to employ unlicensed fisherfolk, or fish worker, or crew. The owner and operator of the distant water fishing vessel, upon a summary finding of administrative liability, shall be fined 40,000 pesos for each unlicensed fisherfolk, fish worker, or crew, and suspension or cancellation of license. The owner and operator of the commercial fishing vessel or distant water fishing vessel, shall, upon conviction by a court of law, be fined with twice the amount of the administrative fine, and suspension or cancellation of license. All crew on board a commercial fishing vessel shall be required a fisherman's license, except the following: captain or master, cook, unless he is also involved in fishing, crew declared in the manifest, unless he is also involved in fishing, and non-crew passengers declared in the manifest. The presentation of an official receipt, covering a completed application for a renewal of a fisherman's license, and a certification from the DAB-FAR that the renewal is being processed, shall be accepted as proof to negate liability under this section. Section 114 penalizes obstruction of defined migration paths. It shall be unlawful for any person to obstruct any defined migration path of anadromous, catadromous, and other migratory species. The administrative liability of the offender include an administrative fine of 150,000 to 500,000 pesos, dismantling of the obstruction at the expense of the offender, and the suspension or revocation of the permit or license. Upon conviction by a court of law, the offender shall be imprisoned for 7 to 12 years, and fine of twice the amount of the administrative fine, dismantling of the obstruction at the expense of the offender, and the suspension or revocation of the permit or license. Section 115 is about obstruction to fishery law enforcement officer. The fishing vessel owner, master or operator, or any other person acting on behalf of any fishing vessel, who assaults, resists, intimidates, harasses, seriously interferes with, or unduly obstructs or delays a fishery law enforcement officer, authorized inspector or observer, the deputized fishwarden of the LGU, or any lawfully boarding government officers, in the exercise of their duties shall be penalized under this code. Any person who does not allow any authorized officer, or an observer to exercise any of the legal duties, shall be deemed to be obstructing that officer or person. The administrative liability of the offender shall include cancellation of license or permit, and an administrative fine of 1 million pesos for fishing vessels operating in Philippine waters, or 2 million pesos for fishing vessels operating beyond Philippine waters. Upon conviction by a court of law, the offender shall be imprisoned from 6 months to 2 years, a fine twice the amount of the administrative fine, and cancellation of license or permit. Non-compliance with fisheries observer coverage is punishable under Section 116. The law states that it shall be unlawful for Philippine distant water fishing vessel to sail without a fisheries observer on board, as required by Regional Fisheries Management Office or RFMO conservation and management measures. Similarly, it shall also be unlawful for commercial fishing vessels to sail without a fisheries observer in compliance with this code, and the rules and regulations promulgated by the department. Upon a summary finding of administrative liability, the offender shall pay a fine of 500,000 pesos, and forfeiture of the catch and gear. Upon conviction by a court of law, the offender shall be imprisoned for 1 month and 1 day to 6 months, and a fine of twice the amount of the administrative fine, confiscation of catch and suspension, or cancellation of license. Section 117 tackles non-compliance with port state measures. No foreign fishing vessel shall be allowed entry without providing at least 24-hour prior notice. When a foreign fishing vessel is granted entry, failure to provide a catch report shall be deemed unlawful. It shall likewise be unlawful for any person to fail to comply with other rules on port state measures, promulgated by the department, in coordination with port state authorities. Failure to comply with the 24-hour period may result in denial of permission to enter or use of port facilities, and the vessel may be subject to onboard inspection and/or impoundment. Failure to comply with rules and regulations on conservation and management measures is punishable under Section 118. It shall be unlawful for any person to fail to comply with conservation and management measures adopted in rules and regulations to be promulgated by the department, pursuant to international conventions, RFMO resolutions, and laws of coastal states, where Philippine vessels fish. The administrative liability of the offender include confiscation of catch, and suspension or cancellation of license or permit, and an administrative fine of twice the value of the catch, or the amount indicated below, whichever is higher. For municipal fishing, it is 20,000 pesos or community service, in case he or she failed to pay the fine. For small-scale commercial fishing, 1 million pesos. For medium-scale commercial fishing, 2,500,000 pesos. And for large-scale commercial fishing, it is 5 million pesos. Upon conviction by a court of law, the offender shall be imprisoned for 6 months, and fined twice the amount of the administrative fine, and confiscation of the catch, and suspension or cancellation of license. Section 119 is about non-compliance with vessel monitoring measures. The law states that no municipal, commercial or distant water fishing vessel shall engage in fishing activity without complying with the vessel monitoring measures or VMM, promulgated by the department in coordination with the LGUs. For vessels operating in Philippine waters, only the catcher vessel shall be covered by this requirement. It shall also be unlawful to intentionally tamper with, switch off, or disable the Vessel Monitoring System or VMS. The administrative liability of the fishing vessel owner, master or any other person acting on behalf of the vessel owner, shall include confiscation of catch, suspension or revocation of the license, and an administrative fine equivalent to twice the value of the catch or the amount indicated below, whichever is higher. For municipal fishing, it is 10,000 pesos or community service, in case he or she failed to pay the fine. For small-scale commercial fishing, 250,000 pesos. For medium-scale commercial fishing, it is 500,000 pesos, and for large-scale commercial fishing, 2,500,000 pesos. In case of violation committed in waters beyond national jurisdiction, the administrative fine shall be equivalent to 5 times the value of the catch, or twice the amount indicated above, whichever is higher. Upon conviction by a court of law, the master, or any other person acting on behalf of the vessel owner, shall be imprisoned for 6 months to 2 years, and fined twice the amount of the administrative fine, confiscation of catch and suspension, or revocation of the license. The vessel monitoring measures shall apply to licensed Philippine-flagged fishing vessels, operating within and outside Philippine waters as follows. 1. All licensed Philippine-flagged commercial catcher and carrier vessels operating outside Philippine waters shall be installed with a two-way ALC, and 2. For catcher vessels operating in Philippine waters, the application of VMM shall be determined in consultation with the stakeholders, following the process stated in Rule 65.2. Section 120 prohibits constructing, importing, or converting fishing vessels or gears, without permit from the Department. It shall be unlawful for any person to construct or import fishing vessels or gears, or to convert other vessels into fishing vessels, without permit from the Department. The administrative liability of the offender include an administrative fine of 50,000 pesos for small-scale commercial fishing, 500,000 pesos for medium-scale commercial fishing, and 2,500,000 pesos for large-scale commercial fishing. Upon conviction by a court of law, the offender shall be imprisoned from 1 month and 1 day to 6 months, and a fine of twice the amount of the administrative fine. Section 121 prohibits the use of unlicensed gear. Any person who uses a fishing gear or method for commercial fishing without license from the Department shall, upon a summary finding of administrative liability, be fined from 200,000 to 500,000 pesos per gear, depending on the seriousness of the violation. Upon conviction by a court of law, the offender shall be fined from 400,000 to 1 million, depending on the seriousness of the violation. Official receipts, covering an application for a renewal of gear license, and a certification from the DABFR that the gear license is undergoing renewal, shall be accepted as proof of renewal of license, pending issuance of the gear license. Falsifying, concealing or tampering with vessel markings, identity or registration, is punishable under Section 122. The law states that, it shall be unlawful for any person to falsify, conceal vessel identity, or lack of registration, or tamper with the vessel markings, identity or registration. Upon a summary finding of administrative liability, the catch of the offender shall be confiscated, and suspension or cancellation of license. There will also be an administrative fine of 10,000 pesos for municipal fishing, or community service in case of failure to pay the fine. 100,000 pesos for small-scale commercial fishing. 1 million pesos for medium-scale commercial fishing, and 5 million pesos for large-scale commercial fishing. In case of violation by distant water fishing vessels, the administrative fine shall be twice the amount indicated above. Upon conviction by a court of law, the offender shall be imprisoned from 2 to 6 years, and a fine equivalent to twice the amount of the administrative fine, confiscation of catch, and suspension or cancellation of license. Section 123 prohibits concealing, tampering or disposing of evidence relating to an investigation of a violation. Concealing, tampering or disposing evidence relating to an investigation of a violation is a punishable offense. Upon a summary finding of administratively liability, the offender shall be suspended, or his license be cancelled, and an administrative fine of 10,000 pesos for municipal fishing, or community service in case of failure to pay the fine. 100,000 pesos for small-scale commercial fishing. 1 million pesos for medium-scale commercial fishing, and 5 million pesos for large-scale commercial fishing. In case of violation by distant water fishing vessels, the administrative fine shall be twice the amount indicated above. Upon conviction by a court of law, the offender shall be imprisoned from 5 to 10 years, and fine equivalent to twice the administrative fine, and suspension or cancellation of the license. Section 124 is about non-compliance with the requirements for the introduction of foreign, or exotic aquatic species. The importation, introduction, or breeding, foreign, or exotic aquatic species without the conduct of risk analysis and prior approval of the department, is prohibited. The administrative liability include payment of 200,000 to 6 million pesos administrative fine, and confiscation and destruction of the foreign or exotic species. Should the species become invasive, and result to predation of native aquatic biota, loss of income or damage to the habitat, the offender shall bear the costs of containment, eradication and/or restoration. Upon conviction by a court of law, the offender shall be imprisoned for 6 to 12 years, and fined 400,000 to 12 million pesos, confiscation of foreign or exotic species, and the costs for containment, eradication or restoration. Section 125 is all about failure to comply with standards and trade-related measures. It shall be unlawful for any person to fail to comply with standards for weights, volume, quality and other requirements for all fishery transactions and trade-related measures, as prescribed by the Department. Upon a summary finding of administrative liability, the offender shall find with 50,000 to 2 million pesos, depending on the seriousness, extent and volume of trade associated with the violation, confiscation of the shipment or fishery products, and suspension or revocation of registration or license. Upon conviction by a court of law, the offender shall be imprisoned 6 months to 2 years, and a fine of 100,000 to 4 million pesos, depending on the seriousness, extent and volume of trade associated with the violation, confiscation of the shipment or fishery products, and suspension or revocation of registration or license. Section 126 tackles possessing, dealing in or disposing illegally caught or taken fish. It is prohibited to ship, commercially transport, offer for sale, sell, import, export, or have custody, control, or possession of, or to deal in or in any manner dispose of any fish or species caught, taken or retained in violation of this code. The discovery of any fish or species caught with the use of explosives, or noxious, or poisonous substances, shall constitute a prima facie presumption that the possessor, seller, fish dealer, transporter, importer, or exporter thereof, has knowledge that the fish or species was caught or taken in violation of this code. Upon a summary finding of administrative liability, the offender shall be fined with 50,000 to 200,000 pesos, or 5 times the value of fish or species, whichever is higher, and confiscation of the same. Upon conviction by a court of law, the offender shall be imprisoned for 6 months to 2 years, and fine of 8 times the value of the species, or from 100,000 to 500,000 pesos, whichever is higher. The fish or fishery products shall also be confiscated, and the registration or license shall be suspended or revoked. The DIBFR shall train fish sellers, fish dealers, transporters, importers, or exporters, on the detection of fish caught through the use of explosives. The training shall be mandatory. The instances when a prima facie presumption shall apply are as follows. 1. Completion of the training by the offender. 2. Failure to complete the training for an unjustifiable cause, or 3. Failure to attend despite due notice. The local government units, LGU, shall ensure that no fish caught through the use of explosives shall be issued an auxiliary invoice. The LGU personnel authorized to issue the auxiliary invoice shall also undergo the mandatory training. Section 127 is about unauthorized disclosure of sensitive technical information. Data from the vessel monitoring system, or vessel monitoring measure, and other related data arising therefrom, shall be considered as sensitive technical information. Any unauthorized disclosure of said data, including all other data referred to in Section 155 in this code, by any person, shall be penalized with imprisonment of 6 months and 1 day to 6 years, removal from office, and forfeiture of all retirement benefits, where applicable. However, the following instances are authorized to disclosed, provided the affected party is informed of such disclosure. 1. When officially requested by a government agency, to be used as evidence for the prosecution of fishery or other offenses. 2. When requested by the flag, coastal or port state, for its own investigation or traceability, and 3. Other analogous circumstances. Section 128 is all about other violations. In addition to the prohibitions in this code, the Department, in consultation with the LGUs, local Farm Cs, and N-Farm C, shall issue fishery administrative orders or regulations for the conservation, preservation, management and sustainable development of fisheries and aquatic resources. Violation of administrative orders or regulations promulgated by the Department, or any provision thereof, shall subject the offender to a fine of 100,000 to 5 million pesos, depending on the socio-economic impact and seriousness of the violation, volume and value of the fisheries product, damage to the environment due to the violation, and the habituality of the offender. Section 129 is about the escalation clause. The law states that the fines herein prescribed shall be increased by at 10% every 3 years, to compensate for inflation, and to maintain the deterrent function of such fines. In Section 135, accompanying administrative sanctions for serious violations, is included. It states that the adjudication committee may impose the following additional sanctions to the administrative penalties imposed for serious violations. 1. Confiscation of fishing gear. 2. Impoundment of fishing vessel. 3. Temporary suspension or permanent revocation of license or permit. 4. Temporary or permanent ban from the availment of applicable duty and tax rebates. 5. Inclusion in the EU fishing vessel list. 6. Denial of entry and other port services. 7. Blacklisting, and 8. NBSP, increase in the amount of fines, but not to exceed 5 times the value of the catch. In case of repeated violations within a 5-year period, the amount of fine may be increased up to 8 times the value of the catch. During the pendency of the administrative or the criminal case, the Department may impound the vessel or conveyance, gear and other paraphernalia used in the commission of the offense. In applying these accompanying sanctions, the Department shall take into account the seriousness of the violation as defined in paragraph 82 of Section 4 of this Code, the habituality or repetition of violation, manner of commission of the offense, severity of the impact on the fishery resources and habitat, socio-economic impact, cases of concealment or destruction of evidence, eluding arrest, resisting lawful orders, and other analogous circumstances. The overall level of sanctions and accompanying sanctions shall be calculated in a manner that is proportionate, effective and dissuasive, to deprive the offender of the economic benefits derived from the serious violation. Section 137 tackles about community service. In case the offender is a municipal fisherfolk, or has no property over which the Department may impose the fines and penalties prescribed for the offense, community service may be rendered in lieu of the fine. The Department shall promulgate the rules and regulations for this purpose, taking into account that the service should be rendered in accordance with needs of the community where the offense is committed, and computed based on the fine and the prevailing minimum wage in the community, among others. Examples of community services may include 1. Planting of mangroves in mangrove areas, or river embankments. 2. Rendering services for a certain period to a community-managed mangrove nursery, marine finfish hatchery, or community fish landing center. 3. Capacitating the fisherfolks and their families, in the community where the offense was committed, through the conduct of alternative livelihood seminars, free health programs/medical missions, or provision of educational materials/supplies. 4. Developing an information, education campaign material on fishery and fishery resource management and conservation, and disseminating the same. 5. Participating in, or undertaking a coastal cleanup operation, or 6. Organizing other activities that will redound to the benefit of the community, where the violation was committed.